Hello and welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponderer. I'm the host, Neil Trotter. This is a YouTube channel where we talk about philosophy, specifically philosophical texts. We do other things too, but specifically we talk about philosophy texts, and then we discuss like themes in those texts. I mean, sometimes they're not specifically philosophical texts, but I always talk about the philosophical themes in each text, and we just do a deep dive into the ideas and the concepts that are raised. The book that we're going to be talking about today, it has some deep philosophy in it for sure, specifically political philosophy, but also just existentialism and just various kinds of, even transcendentalism is in here. It's all types of philosophy in here. So I think it's a good discussion to talk about. But before we go there, I just want to say that this is also part of a series that we have on the Black Ponderer. The series, it's ongoing, right? It's called, why is this channel called the Black Ponderer? Why the Black Ponderer? B-L-A-C-K, black. Because I know that kind of roughs up people's feathers, rubs people in the wrong way. Like, why don't you just call yourself the Ponderer? What's wrong with that? Why you gotta throw race in the mix? Aren't we beyond that? Isn't philosophy past that? That's what people tell me, right? That's what the comments I get often. Not so often anymore, because this is an ongoing series and we've been trying to explain this. But yeah, I feel passionately about addressing the issue of racism, white supremacy, and all types of racial discrimination, and not just racial, but all gender inequality and classism and ableism, just all different kinds of discrimination and oppression that exist in our society. And people think like, oh, if you just ignore it, it'll just go away. If you just don't talk about it, then it won't be a thing. But that's definitely wrong. In fact, ignoring it enables it to continue, right? And I am passionate about using philosophy as a tool, as something we can utilize to help combat these kinds of oppression and discriminations, right? And so that's what we're going to do here today. And we're going to do that via a deep dive, well, I guess sort of kind of a deep dive into this book right here. This very good book. Oh, I have a printout copy of it. So I'm going to show you the printout. It's called Tip of the Spear. It's by Orisanmi Burton. And the subtitle is Black Radicalism, Prison Repression, and the Long Attica Revolt. So Tip of the Spear, it's an excellent book. Definitely a damn good book. And it is a very informed, scholarly, academic, with a lot of citations and research done. And it's also very heavy on the narrative, and it uses a lot of interviews from actual people that were involved in the Attica prison revolt. That happened, a very popular thing that happened in history. But a lot of people don't know too much about it in depth, right? And this book goes into it in depth, and it also puts the Attica Revolt in the context of overall prison development here in the United States of America. And so the book is an abolitionist book. It's quite an abolitionist angle. The abolition of prisons, right? The complete obliteration and elimination of the prison system, right? It's got that angle. And if you watch the Black Ponderer, we're very abolitionist here. So the book delves deep into how the prison system enforces white supremacy. And it talks about how the Attica prison revolt, and prison revolts in general, are a fight against white supremacy, and actually they are a fight toward prison abolition. So it's giving this broader context that's like really informed and quite philosophical. It's very good at making that connection between like the prison system, the way prisoners are treated, and how that is connected to racism and oppression and discrimination here in the United States of America. It does a very good job doing that, and it also talks a lot about how gender discrimination is used and patriarchy is enforced in ways that discriminate against prisoners, and like how toxic masculinity is used, and how like that, you know, it talks about various kinds of masculinity and where some is accepted and others are not. I mean, it really goes deep into social relations and how different forms of oppression contribute to supporting white supremacy, you know, in the context of the prison system. I mean, it's very deep. So are we going to be able to talk about everything that this book mentions? No. I would encourage you to read the book. It's a great book. But I will talk about some highlights in regards to the series theme, why the Black Ponderer is called the Black Ponderer. So the first thing we got to understand is like, what is blackness? Like, when I say Black Ponderer, what do I mean? Do I mean like a ponderer that it has dark skin? Is that what I'm talking about? Because a lot of people are saying like, why are you highlighting your dark skin? Like, that's irrelevant. It's like, well, it's more to it than that. When we say black, we're meaning much more than that. And so I would like to share with you a quote. It is on page 4. It's part of the introduction, and it is the third paragraph. So I will read here. Attica was and is a multiracial structure of revolt led by people who self-identified as black. However, the blackness they claimed was as much, if not more, a collective political designation as an individual identity. Okay? So black is a political designation as much as it is an individual identity. Even more so, you know, if not more, but I would say even more so, right? So what does that mean? Well, let's continue reading. Through this rubric, black skin is insufficient for blackness. Just, yep. For decades, combatant theorists and politically engaged academics have conceptualized political blackness as a mode of consciousness emerging from a collective historical experience of oppression and struggle. So, let me repeat that. Is a mode of consciousness emerging from a collective historical experience of oppression and struggle. Okay, so that's very important. That's very important, right? What blackness is a mode of consciousness emerging from a collective historical experience of oppression and struggle. Okay, so that's important when I call myself the Black Ponderer, right? Because what I'm doing is, like, when I'm talking about philosophy, I am engaging within this mode of consciousness which emerged from a historical experience of oppression and struggle. So what's happening is, when we're talking about philosophy, we're getting a different kind of a perspective, a perspective that's not talked about, or that's not engaged with in philosophy, right? And that's important. When we talk about philosophy, we have to consider different perspectives, different modes and contexts where people engage in philosophy. We can't just talk about one specific kind of mode, you know, or one specific kind of context or historical reference point, right? Because you will get plenty of insights from other perspectives, right? Like the black perspective. And you might say, like, there is no black perspective. Well, there is, right? And they're going to give you different insights, you know, black people, whenever you're reading like Plato or Aristotle, or like Jean-Paul Sartre, or like, you know, Rene Descartes, or all these other philosophers, right? You might say like, well, it doesn't matter who's reading it, you're going to get the same insight. That's not true, right? Different people from different perspectives, different experiences are going to give you different insights. And so with Black Ponder, I'm trying to give an insight from this kind of perspective, this historical experience of oppression and struggle, okay, and it's collective, right? Not to say I'm speaking for all black people, but I am from that frame of reference, and that's important to understand. Now I'm just going to read you the footnote here. That's on page 231. It's the 10th footnote here. It says, the Black Panther Party and a Black Liberation Army member, Albert Washington, defined black as a political condition, a state of oppression and consciousness, a nation seeking to become a people who hope. A people who hope. And it's, a state of consciousness and oppression. Similarly, anarchists, Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army veteran Ashanti Alston writes, I think of being Black not so much as an ethnic category, but an oppositional force or touchstone for looking at situations differently. This is so important. Let me repeat that. It is an oppositional force or touchstone for looking at situations differently. Black culture has always been oppositional and is all about finding ways to creatively resist oppression here in the most racist country in the world. Talk about the United States of America, right? And that's from Black Anarchism, a book we might read and cover here on the channel eventually. But yeah, so it's important to understand that this is not just about like skin tone, right? I mean, of course, like skin tone is the basis for a lot of this oppression, but it's just an indicator that's arbitrarily chosen, right, as a control mechanism because it was convenient for socioeconomic control throughout American history, right? But it's not just about skin tone, right? It's about a historical reference point or a historical experience. It's undeniable that people of my skin tone, non-white, have been discriminated and continue to be discriminated against and oppressed. All one has to do is look at our criminal justice systems, particularly our prison system, right? Where we're disproportionately targeted, right? And so that's going to give us an informed perspective that we can take into the world of philosophy, right? We can look at philosophers and be like, wait a minute, you got this wrong, or oh, well, you're not considering this point of view. Oh, wait a minute, the world as it is today is not how you're seeing it. Let me explain to you some other things that you might be missing because you're not of that historical experience of oppression and consciousness. So what are we talking about here? What historical experience of oppression and consciousness, like specifically, what are you talking about here? Well, I'll continue some more quotes here in the book and to further explain. Okay, this is page 5 in the introduction. This is the third paragraph starting off here. The Long Attica Revolt was itself a demand. Okay, and I skipped down several lines here. The content of this maximum demand was the abolition of prisons, the abolition of war, the abolition of racial capitalism, the abolition of white man, capital white man. White man as a construct, as a social construct, white supremacy, right? And the emergence of new modes of social life not predicated on enclosure, extraction, domination, or dehumanization, okay? That's what we're talking about here. So what is abolition, right? Abolition is a rejection of social life that's predicated on enclosure, extraction, domination, and or dehumanization. Okay, and a Black perspective on that is going to give you a lot of insight because that frame of reference has intimate experience with that kind of social life. Black people have intimate experience with that kind of oppression, right? Which informs their consciousness. That other people, say white people, don't have that informed consciousness, right? Which is not to say like, oh, what are you saying? You're better than me, or you're, you got some higher insight than a white person. We're not saying, no, that's not what we're saying. We're just saying that there's a different perspective that needs to be considered that is often overlooked. And so there's blinders on, like there's parts of philosophy that aren't even addressed, right? Not only because it's convenient for the social power structures that exist in the world, like the existence of prisons, but just because people are oblivious to it because that's not being taught, it's not being considered, it's being erased. So it's about considering other forms of experiences, other perspectives to enlighten, to contribute to the wisdom and the knowledge to progress philosophy forward. Well, let's continue. This is page 6. This is the 13th line here. And here is a conversation with Shay Neves, a former Minister of Education for a prison-based information of the Young Lords Party, a veteran of the Attica Rebellion, okay? This is a quote that says, "Listen, all I can say is we brothers, man. We need each other. It's not only me, but you. That's what keeps us going. Exchange, it keeps the spirit going, and it keeps us moving toward freedom. The more you acquire, the more I acquire. And without you, it's not me. You make me, and I make you." And that's a huge theme in the Black Ponderer. Interconnectedness, reality as ecology, solidarity. Nobody's free unless everybody's free. We're radically dependent on each other. Independence is an illusion. It doesn't exist. We've been talking about this for years now here on the channel. And so prison abolition, and particularly the revolt in the Attica prison, was a movement toward that reality. And that's what this book is arguing. It's like these kinds of revolts are, they showcase this kind of alternative way of existing that is not popularized, but is a beneficial, true, and constructive way that we need to go about living in the world if we want to succeed as a species. But let me continue where I left off. Shea's poetic reflection illuminates the abolitionist ethical philosophy at the core of the revolt. Though immediately triggered by carceral repression and violence, Attica signifies a positive demand that exceeds normative frameworks of the political and challenges hegemonic norms of individualism that are at the heart of capitalism, patriarchy, and white Western humanism. So again, when we talk about blackness, we're not just talking about skin tone. We're not just fixated on that, right? Of course, again, skin tone is the basis or the indicator that is used to discriminate, sure. But there's more to it than that, which I like to focus on as I call myself the Black Ponderer, And so here's another quote that I will read. This is page 53. It is the second paragraph, fourth line. A life and death contest that unfolded simultaneously on corporal and discursive terrains. The physical classes of force are only legible because captives were also engaged in a struggle to narrate these clashes. Both were shaped by such a profound asymmetry that achieving a decisive victory seemed beyond the rebels' physiological capacities as earthly beings. And yet, fully aware that their bodies would be crushed, they continued to resist. And we're talking about the prison revolt, because the white supremacist patriarchal system is going to come down hard on these prisoners who are revolting. They know that, but they're continuing. In doing so, they struggled on a third terrain, one that nurtured a being beyond the body, a spirit, a social consciousness, an affective state that is largely beyond representation. So when we're talking about spirit, we're not talking about specifically a woo type of thing, a new agey type of spirituality type of thing, or even not so much just a religious thing. Not necessarily, we're not focusing on that. We're talking about a social consciousness, and that is metaphysical. But social consciousness is absolutely real, right? And so, again, Black Ponderer, we're talking about a consciousness, right? And that's very important. Philosophy and consciousness, that's huge in philosophy, consciousness. And so, when I say Black Ponderer, I'm talking about a specific kind of consciousness in regards to philosophy. But I'll continue here. Although Leon demanded human treatment and human dignity, and Leon is just one of the people who participated in the prison revolt, he noted that his spirit burned for a form of freedom that the captors had no ability to grant, a freedom that could only be taken, or more accurately, one that had to be invented. That key word here, invented. And invent they did, as Fanon explains, the great French philosopher Frantz Fanon. A new humanism is written into the objectives and methods of the struggle. So they're inventing a new kind of consciousness, right? That's what consciousness is a state of being that is created, that's invented. And that's so philosophical. A new humanism, right? So when we say Black Ponderer, when I say it, and I think this text supplements this idea of I'm talking about a new or an alternative way of interpreting philosophy that's encourages humanism and freedom, and develops philosophy further constructively, that carries the objectives of philosophy higher. This is what I'm saying when I'm saying like the Black Ponderer. But let me skip down 4 lines here. The rebels refused their compartmentalized dehumanization by enacting an insurgent counter-humanism that aimed to redistribute a fraction of the violence that assailed them. Yet, within, against and beyond this totalizing spiral of violence, I showed them evolving on an altogether different terrain. They were cultivating intra and intercorporal modalities of collectivity, intimacy, love, tenderness, modalities, right? Modalities, modes of consciousness. This is, we are focusing on like modalities, modes of consciousness, states of consciousness, because these are highly philosophical ideas. Like this is philosophy. This is as close to philosophy as one can get. Right? And so, it's important. And there, the author here is definitely talking about race relations and discrimination and oppression, and how we need to rise beyond that, and how it's an issue of social consciousness and an issue of spirituality. And so, I'm just highlighting that and saying, like, to say that we need to separate race from philosophy, or like philosophy is beyond race, it's quite foolish, to be honest with you. It's a little silly. I mean, it's not a little, it's a lot silly, right? It's a little absurd and ridiculous, right? I guess I'd say a lot, because I don't want to be too brutal and rude, but should be honest about this. It's important. It's important, but I'll continue I will continue with the quote here that reveal the smoldering core of the revolt's revolutionary content. So, I'm just continuing on the idea of social consciousness and spirituality. All right. This is page 107. This is from this is a quote from another participant in the prison revolt here. And this is the 3rd paragraph, and I'm on the 4th line here. I understood freedom as more than just free will unobstructed by any external factors. So it's more than that. What else is it? But also as an emotional, sensory, symbiotic relationship between woman, so it's like WO/man. So it's woman and man. Trying to be inclusive like that, but forget the binary. Right? Let's transcend that. Right? What about the non-binary people? So woman, man, and non-binary people in the universe. It was simply gratitude, humble submission to the natural laws of creation, and the sense of elation of feeling that connection. Connection between you, me, and the universe as a whole. That's some philosophical stuff right there. And so that's what freedom is. Freedom is the ability to connect yourself with all other things or all other subjects. And that's a huge theme in philosophy. You have to have freedom to be able to do that, right? And so again, we fall back to Black Ponderer. Why do we say black? Because we're specifically talking about a consciousness, a mode of consciousness that experiences oppression that limits the ability to do that. Right. So facing that oppression, that experiential oppression, right? We can, me as a black person, but other people of color and other genders outside of man, right? We can give some informed insight on how our society limits freedom. Right? And we can give some philosophical context that will be beneficial, right? Because we have that unique insight, right? That specific mode of consciousness that we're happy to share, but oftentimes gets erased pushed aside, or like saying, oh, you shouldn't talk about that, you know. And you might say, no, nobody does that. Well, I mean, check out my comment section, you know, where people specifically say, stop putting that black in the Black Ponder. It's okay. You're now ignoring, just getting rid of this perspective, right? This mode of consciousness, right? That's very unphilosophical, in my opinion. And I think this book makes the case for that. But let me continue. I skip down 3 lines: that the exuberant and transcendental modes of consciousness, curiosity, and becoming. You know, as philosophers, as people who study philosophy, we should be curious and of these various forms of consciousness that are becoming, right? Like black consciousness, for instance. It's just be like a kind of exuberance to be like, okay, what do you have to say? You know, well, let me gauge your perspective, or like let's talk about each other's perspectives, and let's share our consciousness. Right? I skip down 2 more lines. A profound desire for genuine connection to other people, the natural environment, and the cosmos. This is what it means to be black, right? It's more than just skin tone, right? It's an alternative to like the oppressive, discriminatory, limiting forces of white supremacy, which definitely still exists today. White supremacy is very anti-conscious expanding. Conscious expanding threatens white supremacy, and so there's a lot of force or pressure to go against anything that is opposed to that or highlights this truth. But here at the Black Ponderer, we want to highlight that. We want to say, hey, wait a minute. There's other ways of interpreting philosophy that aren't specifically within the Eurocentric framework or perspective. And here we have a reiteration of the importance of acknowledging blackness. Okay, this is page 148, and this is the 3rd paragraph. In the symbolic universe of white man, Attica was much more than a prison rebellion. It was what Baldwin called, James Baldwin that is, a upheaval in the universe. In response, state actors, white civil society, and mass media coalesced into a frenzied mob that inflicted world-shattering violence upon the bodies and minds, the very being of the rebels. These rituals of sexual revenge and soul murder consciously and unconsciously drew from fugitively bygone eras of colonial and shadow dominance. So the author is not just talking about the response to the prisoners who revolted because they threatened the framework of the white man, right, as superior and dominant, and the lie of dominance being the ultimate way of being, and the way to achieve everything, to dominate through violence, right? You know, that's all part of the fiction of the white man, right? White supremacy. So the author is not just talking about that dominant, violent response against the rebels for their revolt, but the author is also talking about the prison conditions in and of themselves, right? Which also uphold this whole concept of domination, right? Through extreme violence, right? And this kind of white man as the superior, as the dominant, and everything else, including black man, and you know, woman, and feminine, and all these other categories that are used to discriminate, right? And prop up the fiction of whiteness, right? Which causes this reality that we live in. You know, the author's talking about that too. Irreducible to tactics, strategy, or political rationality, these rituals conjured a figurative world in which black beings exist only as objects of white enjoyment and self-actualization. Though officially aimed at restoring order within a riotous rural prison in western New York, these acts of sexual revenge aimed to stabilize a deeper order, the gendered racial order that upholds capital, nation, empire, and civilization. The racial taxonomy through which the white man is formed and without which he vanishes into oblivion. So again, like the argument is like the prisons exist to uphold this fiction of white supremacy, like that's why they're there. And if they go away, then the idea of white supremacy goes away with it, because that's how it's upheld through like these ideas of dominance and this idea of using other peoples, like black beings, for the white man's enjoyment and self-actualization. Right? Prisons are like institutions that are utilized to do this. So, and that's the argument for prison abolition. And if you look at the conditions of prisons, you will obviously see that that's what's going on. And this book goes really deep into those conditions. Trigger warnings, if you choose to read this. And I would encourage you to do this, but it goes really in deep with prison conditions. So, it's pretty violent, and it's very white supremacist. Violent white supremacist situations going on, very patriarchal. So my point is, right, through the reading quotes from this book, I want to just convey that we can't ignore this problem, right, of racism, right, of white supremacy, more specifically white supremacy. The fact that people even cringe or like read the title of the channel, like Black Ponderer. Oof. Why? Because what's happening is that there is a reluctance to confront the issue that is holding back humanity, right? Because that would be a huge shift and challenge in one's way of thinking about things, right? Problem is, like, our current way of thinking about things that is dominant and normalized, this white supremacist Eurocentric way of thinking about things like philosophy, is enforcing huge oppression, right, and hence suffering of many different kinds of people, including like black people, just non-white males, right? And that's just the reality of the situation. But then it even hurts the white man too. It hurts in the sense that it hurts the field of philosophy, right? Because you were only limiting philosophy in this one way of thinking that doesn't allow the human species to grow and develop and like mature and like further actualize. We're limiting ourselves in this very limited way of thinking that only exists to prop up the social economic institutions and powers of a particular kind of person, right? The white patriarch. That's all I'm saying. Well, I'll read this final quote here on page 209. The state's ongoing attempt to control, eliminate, and induce particular ways of being black. As it stands now, black people cannot even conceive of real freedom. We are afraid of real liberation because we have been programmed to be afraid by racist class oppression. What does that mean? That means, like, I can't even call myself the Black Ponderer. Can't even do that because people are like, no, don't do that. Why? Because we're past that. Like, let's not even think about it. I don't even want to even acknowledge it. It's like, that's what the author's talking about too. It's like, we gotta acknowledge these things. I skipped down 4 lines. Education has always been another method of programming black people into the lowest strata of capitalist society, ensuring generations of exploitable and marginal labor. What does that mean? Like when we talk about philosophy and you say like, well, let's not discuss philosophy outside of like stuff from Europe, or don't put your name Black Ponderer. That, and the education system has always done that, right? Even today, like we have in the American state that I live in, Tennessee, there's a huge book ban, right, going on with books that have to deal with race relations or gender studies, or even discussion of gender, are like banned completely. Like, we don't talk about these books in public schools, right? Why? Are we afraid of like learning different perspectives? Yes, we are. Why are we afraid? People, it's the powers that be, these institutions that depend on that kind of thinking to not exist. Right? They want you to think a specific kind of way. And if you think outside of that, I'm talking about the white supremacist framework, the patriarchal framework. If you exist outside of that, then those institutions lose their power. Right? That's what this is all about. And the author this quote is even saying, they also lose generations of exploitative and marginal labor. So, capitalism too. These institutionally sponsored education programs were increasingly competing with the threatened forms of self-directed Black study that gave rise to the revolt. Self-directed Black study. That's what the Black Ponderer is. Self-directed Black study, which is like, it threatens, a white supremacist way of looking at philosophy, doesn't it? I'm not just saying Black Ponderer, right? I'm just calling it like it is. In order to break these psychological class chains of 20th century enslavement, we must build a revolutionary culture that not only programs our minds out of oppression, but at the same time impels us against the enemy class and culture. Revolutionaries were also talking about programming the population, but unlike that of the state, theirs was not a paternalistic, elitist top-down approach, but a consensual approach to deprogram and reprogram besieged communities from the bottom up. So the author is saying that the prison revolution, like the Attica, focuses on Attica, but also talks about other prison revolts too. I guess I used the word revolution, I meant revolt, was a way to deprogram white supremacist thinking and kind of clash against this illusion of white supremacy that enforces all this oppression on most people to prop up a minority, which is, the white elite class. And so that's important to be aware of that, because the author is making a very important connection between the prison revolt of Attica and like other forms of fighting against oppression, right? One can make a connection with all different kinds of social justice movements and specifically abolitionist movements. There's a relation there. And I would argue like, hey, calling this channel the Black Ponderer, not just a ponder, relates in that way. In that way, as look, man, we gotta take philosophy outside of the European context, right? It's more than that. It's more than that. It's a lot more, right? The fact that we're only focusing on the European context within philosophy is highly limiting philosophy. Not to say that the great European philosophers, the Greek philosophers, and all these other people, the French philosophers, they have very important things to say, absolutely. But they, not only there's all these other philosophers, right, that are not European, that don't get highlighted. There's that are amazing, right? So there's that. But also, like, reading these old school European philosophers from a perspective of a Black man, a real, true Black man, meaning like someone who has that mode of social consciousness that's dealing with experiential oppression, they're gonna find holes. They're gonna highlight missing pieces, or they might bring up parts that were said that we're not focused on. There's all types of things. As I think, I've done in several of my videos about like people like Hegel or Descartes or philosophers like that, Sartre. It's just a different way of interpreting philosophy. One that's just not focused on, but should be, right? Because that's how we grow as a field, as a philosophical field. We consider all perspectives and we consider all experiences and how those experiences shape the way we interpret things, including philosophy. And those interpretations are important to consider. They fill in gaps and holes and insights, right, in philosophy. And, that's all I'm saying. That's very important. That's very important. So I would encourage you to read the book, Tip of the Spear. It's a great book by Orisanmi, Burton. Great book, great, awesome academic work. I love books that are very well researched. That's one of my favorite kinds of books. I guess I'm a sucker for like, not so much academia, but like well-researched things like that have huge bibliographies of works cited. So like that's like a huge plus for me. And this one has it It has a lot of that, so that's awesome, and it's got some deep philosophical insights. I mean, you can't go wrong reading this book. I think it's great, so check it out. Check it out. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.